जी जी वो ये छुट्टी बाद में अनाउंस होगी।
हाँ तो आप तो गवर्नमेंट से भी आगे चलेंगे तो आप डॉक्टर तक टर्की पे
नहीं कल किया था, कल सबको किया था एक मैसेज, पता नहीं भूल गया मुझे। यार मैंने तो वैसे ही मैसेजेस किए थे।
माइक होना दे वायरस में आपस में टच होते हैं तो फिर वायरस प्रॉब्लम है।
मेरी हर चीज जो है वो माइक पे तो जाएगी।
Assalamualaikum. यार ईमेल कर दो राइट नाउ अभी इसी वक्त औज़ु बिल्लाहि मिनश शैतानिर रजीम बिस्मिल्लाहिर रहमानिर रहीम अस्सलाम वालेकुम व रहमतुल्लाहि व बरकातहू कैसे हैं आप लोग हाउ इज एवरीवन ऑलराइट थैंक यू गड़बड़ हो जाती है इसमें It goes out of the पता नहीं आई डोंट नो जो खुली हुई थी स्लाइड खुली भी नहीं है इसमें
थोड़ा टाइम लेके भी
Okay. Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you. Shukriya, Rustam. Thank you. Who else is online right now? Okay. यूनिवर्सिटी कराची है 20 अच्छा What is this? Okay, sorry. Okay, what we have done in the last two and a half week is primarily we discussed the fundamental and basics of something wrong? Why is it coming like this? What is showing again? गड़बड़ है कुछ हाँ चले अब मेरी रिक्वायर्ड स्लाइड पे चले जाएं इसके बाद बस ये आएगा इस तरह. Okay, before we set it out, let me. Okay, so what we have been discussing since last two and a half weeks is primarily the concept of NMR spectroscopy, which is fundamentally different from what you have actually learned during your BS or MS. We learned that NMR spectroscopy now is different from the absorption NMR spectroscopy, which was initially developed like other techniques. We also learned that NMR spectroscopy with lots of development is now a new technique which is called pulse Fourier transformation NMR spectroscopy. We learned that thank you. That I will do now. I know what you have done. 141. Okay.
From current.
Hmm?
From current.
And see, the basic concept of NMR spectroscopy were discussed in greater length. We try to understand most of the complex changes in NMR spectroscopy by using a block vector diagram. And we then proceeded to understand a number of one-dimensional NMR experiments. If you allow me to take about 10 minutes to brief you what we have done so far in order to set the context for what we want to discuss now, is primarily that the real quest and struggle of NMR spectroscopy was to achieve sensitivity. And for achieving sensitivity, a number of methods were used. And as a result, you were able to see carbon-13 much more prominently as compared to it used to be. So high field NMR spectrometers with large magnets and improved computers, better data processing techniques, and novel pulse sequences were three different areas in which major development took place. And we have gone through in a greater length each one of them. We discussed development of hardware, the larger magnets, the dependence of the magnetic field on the population difference of energies, dependence of precision frequencies on applied magnetic field, a range of different dependencies. Then briefly we'd also discuss that even during the processing of data, which is a very important component of NMR experiment, you by using apodization factors, a variety of different types of mathematical equations. But fundamentally the most important two concepts which we have learned in the process was first pulse Fourier transformation, NMR spectroscopy, that pulses can be applied, skeins can be collected, FIDs are collected and then converted into numbers by using ADCs, and then you do a Fourier transformation, and by doing so you improve the signal to noise ratio sensitivity. This was one very important concept, and equivalent to that, as important as the pulse Fourier transformation, was the concept of polarization transfer. Polarization transfer is a very important concept in which we learn that without independent of improvement in hardware, independent of any data manipulation. You have the capacity of increasing the sensitivity by using a concept of polarization transfer from more sensitive nuclei to less sensitive nuclei. So these were the two most important concepts. And if you look into the whole paradigm of one-dimensional NMR experiments, they are largely very few, they are not very much. You have a pure proton NMR spectrum, a single pulse experiment in which you bring the magnetization from longitudinal magnetization to the transfer magnetization, and you record the FID, right? And you record as many FIDs as you want until you have a satisfaction that you've got an improved signal to noise ratio. Normal carbon-13 NMR spectroscopy, in which we see everything coupled with the attached protons, fully coupled C13 NMR, very simple again, one-dimensional experiment, 190x pulse, bringing magnetization to XY plane, let it relax, and then you record the FID again. Then we learned that fully coupled NMR, C13 NMR spectrum is difficult to interpret, so people have done lots of manipulation, people have done off resonance, long range couplings were removed, then all the direct couplings were removed by using broadband decoupling, and in the process you lost the multiplicity. And then you learn that it is possible to obtain multiplicity by a very simple experiment called APT, attached proton test, or spin echo Fourier transformation, name of a same experiment. Then we also learned that polarization, by using polarization transfer experiment like ENEPT, you can increase the sensitivity, and at the same time you can also get information about the multiplicity by combining the polarization transfer routine with the spectral editing, or so-called EPT. And there were many variants of ENEPT. We talked briefly about DEPT, distortionless enhancement by polarization transfer. And we learned that this particular technique provides you enhanced sensitivity, singlet for every carbon, and information about the multiplicities of the signal. So these were some very important experiments, and right at the end we learned a very important technique which is called homonuclear carbon-13 coupling inadequate experiment, in which we understand the coupling of a carbon-13 next to a carbon-13. And I told you that unfortunately this technique is extremely insensitive because of multiple reasons. Number one, carbon-13 is a very weak magnet. It has a 1/4 of a gyromagnetic ratio. Number two, the natural abundance of carbon-13 only 1%. And number three, the natural abundance of 2 carbon-13 is 1 in 10,000. As a result, you need to have lots of sample and you need to scan it for a long period of time. Experiment is very nice. The information which you get is very, very useful, but having a good inadequate is a major challenge, because the quantity required, the instrument time it needs is unfortunately doesn't really make it a very favorable choice of NMR spectroscopist. All of it was in one dimension. And what the dimension was, this dimension. You see, this is the dimension which is called relaxation time, or T2. Remember I told you that almost जिसे कहते हैं ना सूफियों वाला मामला, that long time ago somebody has actually named it as T2. Even the Lloyd Jackman book, which was written in early 70s, he used the word T2, small T2, not big T2. Big T2 क्या होता है? Spin relaxation. So this small T2 was used for acquisition time or a detection time, FID time. This is the only one dimension which you transfer. This time is then converted into frequency by using a mathematical process call Fourier synthesis or Fourier transformation. Essentially, all the experiments are same. All the experiments are same. There is a relaxation delay equivalent to 5T1, big T1. So everything goes to the thermal equilibrium. Then you perturb the magnetization, perturbation of magnetization, or disturbing the magnetization by a 90x pulse, right? When you give a 90x pulse, you bring it to the xy plane. And when you bring it to the xy plane, then you either insert a delay in between or record right away, as in this case. So there is a 90 pulse and then a recording right after the 90 pulse. If you introduce a delay, this delay is fixed in all skeins. All skeins are exactly identical. All experiments are exactly identical. Every time you achieve thermal equilibrium, every time you give a 90x pulse, every time you give a spin echo pulse, every time you introduce a delay, all experiment 20, 30, 2000, 3000, 4000, all the experiments are exactly identical. Right? Everything is exactly identical. You record an EMAP so many times, you record a broadband so many times, you record APT so many times, you record carbon 13 so many times. Every time the skein is absolutely identical. There are so many experiments, every experiment is exactly identical to the first one. First is identical, so all the experiments are identical. As a result, FSO. So even you record 8 skein or 32 skein like in proton NMR spectroscopy, or you record 26,000 skein in case of inadequate, all of them are exactly identical. FID from every experiment is identical because the process is identical. The whole process from relaxation, from thermal equilibrium to perturbation, from spin echo pulse or any pulse in between, you just name it. Everything is exactly identical, therefore the FID would be exactly identical. And when you put all these FIDs together and convert them into Fourier transformation, you get a frequency domain spectrum in one frequency, because there was only one time domain, and that time is your detection time. You had only one variable and there was a detection time. Now, since all the FIDs were identical, the only gain you had was signal to noise ratio, because noise is random and signals are overlapping. As a result, the scanning of one-dimensional experiments, scanning is just to improve the signal to noise ratio. Otherwise, every experiment is identical to the other experiments. Okay? Whether you record a proton NMR spectrum, or whether you record a broadband decoupled spectrum, or you record a fully coupled spectrum, C13 spectrum, or you record an ENAPT, or you record a DAT, or you record an APT, APT, or you record inadequate, all these skeins are exactly identical. And therefore they are called skein. They call skein. And scanning means that every time you're just scanning them, right? You're just scanning them exactly identical manner. So this was the one-dimensional domain in which you had so many of these experiments, minus NOE, which I didn't mention to you because NOE I would like to discuss at the end of the discussion session when we'll discuss about two-dimension NOE. I don't want to fragment it. So this is what one-dimensional experiments are. Preparation phase is primarily nothing but waiting for thermal equilibrium to achieve. You're preparing your magnetization for experiment, right? जैसे खिलाड़ी जूते उते पहनते हैं, किट पहनते हैं ना, they prepare themselves for experiment, for playing. So this preparation is nothing. Remember, ये कोई बड़ा fancy सा words है. Preparation is just primarily waiting for thermal equilibrium to achieve. Nothing else, right? And this is your radio frequency pulse, 90X pulse or 90Y pulse. I want to name it. This is the pulse. And after this pulse, when you bring magnetization from Z to XY plane, then you record detection. You have a detection phase. You acquire data, and therefore this is only one time delay, and this is T2, and people kept this T2, I don't know why, and I just often wonder why they were so prophetic, so they were able to guess that something else would eventually come forth. Fourier transformation of FIDs will give you a frequency domain. This is your NMR spectrum, C13, inadequate, apt, inept, everything is your NMR experiment. And this NMR experiment has only one frequency because there was only one time, right? There was only one time, therefore time was converted into frequency, and this was done by a mathematical equation called Fourier transformation. Okay? This is your one-dimensional NMR spectrum. Okay, you have any question about this before we proceed to the wondrous world of two-dimensional NMR spectroscopy? फ्रीक्वेंसी है इसको, पता नहीं कभी कभी कुछ लिख देते हैं, कभी कुछ लिख देते हैं. I don't know actually, just frequency. Okay?
When we are taking the different skeins and all skeins are identical, what is the need of taking so many skeins?
Yes, to improve the signal to noise ratio. Because noise in every skein is random, only the signals are overlapping. As a result, as you would take more of a skein, up to a limit, it's not limitless. When you will take more of a skein, you would have strengthening of signal and cancellation of noise. Noise becomes the part of the baseline. And that is one way of signal to noise ratio. But I honestly don't really think that it is so novel as compared to polarization transfer. Because this was essentially the same which people used to do. Even in absorption spectroscopy, they used to just have different absorption spectrum, and they put them together manually, one after the other, to see which peaks are overlapping and which peaks are not overlapping. And the peaks which were not overlapping were always noise. And peaks which were overlapping were always signal to noise ratio. Although the concept of pulse is novel, Fourier transformation and scanning and putting them together is not a novel concept in my opinion. Fundamentally, it is same as you do in absorption spectroscopy. What is novel is polarization transfer. Amazingly novel. Discovery of seminal nature. You understand what seminal means? Seminal nature means that a discovery which began a new field, right, is seminal. What is serendipitous discoveries? अचानक नहीं भाई, अचानक तो sudden discoveries होती हैं. Serendipitous discoveries. Serendipitous is from Serendip, which is an island in Indian Ocean, and it was discovered suddenly. It was discovered without a serendipitous discoveries. And what is accidental discoveries? Tell me what is required for a serendipitous discovery or for accidental discovery? A keen observation. Because if you don't have a keen observation, you just pass through a Serendip slipping. And you would never know that there was an island, beautiful island made of a soft white corals. So serendipitous discovery. But seminal discovery is the discovery which starts a new field and which is the result of lots of thinking. For instance, I told you that there are lots of Nobel Prizes were given but for me there are few people who have actually deserved the Nobel Prize. For instance, the person who discovered that Helicobacter pylori is the causative agents of ulcer, I think deserve at least 20 different Nobel Prizes, because this was a disease which is affecting the largest number of the people, and it was absolutely misunderstood. People were thinking that it was because of anxiety or coffee or acid or alcohol or empty stomach or whatever. He was the first one who said that this is because none of them. It is because of a bug. It is an infectious disease. As a result, 50% of the human population were treated from ulcer. So these are the discoveries which make the real difference in the world, you know. Okay? Well, anyway, I don't know what I'm saying, but okay. So important one-dimensional NMR experiment, proton NMR, carbon-13, various decoupling experiments, attached proton test, polarization transfer experiment, inadequate experiment. These are largely the experiment which comes under the domain of one dimension. And then I show you this horrible looking proton NMR spectrum. Any question from the other locations? You want to ask anything about the 1D before we leave it behind? From Karachi University, Sargodha, Balochistan University, LAMS. Okay. I'm so happy that everybody is understanding everything. No, I want to be Husn Zan, Zawad Wala. You know, but one can really object, क्या कह रहे हैं online lecture. Okay, so this is your one-dimensional NMR experiment, and remember I told you that it contains lots of information. Everything which need to be there is there. Information about the conformation, information about the configuration, information about the connectivities, about coupling, everything is present in this particular NMR spectrum, but interpretation of the spectrum is very, very difficult. And therefore,
saying it as a one dimension.
One
What
dimension.
is that dimension? Whereas in two dimensions there is a length and the breadth. What this one dimension will be called over at here?
This is called one dimension.
What will be that dimension?
This is a frequency dimension. Frequency. Because there is no time, you know, it is only, there was a time which was converted into frequency. And that frequency, remember every frequency is, I want you to recall every time, because I want to make sure that you have an absolutely concrete understanding. Every frequency is actually representing what? A relaxation time, right? A particular relaxation time. So therefore there is a conversion of time into frequency. Every frequency is actually representing a specific precision frequencies. And always recall that you must be able to go back and relate it with the fundamentals. In my opinion, NMR spectroscopy can only be understood by going back to the fundamental. As a result, in every good NMR book, every experiment starts with longitudinal relaxation and a 90 pulse. Every time they explain that there is a 90x pulse which brings magnetization to the Y, because everybody understands that without having a proper context and understanding, you cannot really evolve it into the XY plane. Okay, so this is the protein NMR spectrum, which is not that big. You can have much horrible looking protein NMR spectrum also. Remember, in the chemical space, you can have millions of compounds, and every compound, every proton of every compound on the face of the earth will appear between 1 to 12. So there is a great deal of overlap. in proton NMR spectroscopy, there is less overlapping in carbon 13, which has 0 to 220. But you see, for large molecules like protein, overlapping remain important. So this is the time domain which you have in one-dimensional spectrum, and this is the time domain you have in 2D NMR spectrum. You see, the fellow Gina, who presented this lecture, never published this paper. You would be surprised that this is the unpublished work of an absolutely smart person who never got recognition anywhere in the world. Although in every book people say this was Gina who introduced, but he never published this work. It's an unpublished work. The first thing which was published was in 1972, the Cozy spectrum, and people understood what that means. Now, preparation period is same as achieving thermal equilibrium. Evolution period is right at that point when you achieve a thermal equilibrium, you do something. And you do something to bring your magnetization vector to XY plane generally. This is the general scheme of experiment that you do a 90 pulse, X pulse or Y pulse or whatever, but you bring your magnetization vector at this point to the XY plane, right? And this is a evolution time. This is the addition which was done by Gina. Gina said that preparation time, between preparation time and detection, there is the introduction of a new time which is called evolution time. Evolution time, this evolution period. And I will use the word called periodic increment, or this particular time is increasing in every experiment. So it is not skein, it is a transient. A new word is introduced at this point of time. While in one-dimensional NMR spectrum, it is always a skein because one experiment is exactly identical to the other experiment. This is called transient. Why transient? Because one experiment is different from the other experiment because of evolution time. And evolution time is incremented. What incremented means that you increase this periodically. Periodically, you understand periodically. It's come from periodic table, right? Periodically, that you do it in a very planned way. You don't do it haphazard. You don't have a 0 T1. This is called now T1. And this was the T1 waited for a long period of time. For 30 years, people were waited for T1, small T1, right? So this T1 is 0, and this T1 is 1, T1 is 2, T1 is 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. In every transient, the T1 is periodically increased, not randomly increased. Periodically increased, incremented periodically, which primarily means it's not like 0 T1 and 30 T1 and 15 T1 and 20 T1 and 3 T1. It's not the case. You increase the evolution time, in every experiment. So every experiment is different from the other, isn't it? Although not very much, but every experiment is different from the other by only one thing, and that is the T1 time. Mixing time was also introduced, but mixing time is a fixed time. So it doesn't really make much of a difference because mixing time is important in nuclear Overhauser effect, which we will discuss. Nosy will let you know what mixing time is, but it is a fixed time, therefore it is not a variable time. In every experiment, preparation time is same, mixing time is same, detection, T2. The only time which is different is evolution time. So please try to understand this small T1 is the incremented time delay which you have introduced. And so what you do, you perturb the system by giving a 90x pulse. The time between the perturbation is called evolution time, and it's called T1. Then you have a mixing events. This is a fixed part of the experiment. Some experiment required mixing. Then you have acquisition time, which is primarily recording FID. So there are two variables. One is evolution time, and the other is acquisition time. This is called T1, and this is called T2. So this T1 and T2 are the two variables, and if you want to convert the two variables into frequencies, you need to have two Fourier transformation. And that is the reason why it's called two-dimensional NMR spectrum, because eventually at the end of the day, the T1, small t1 and small t2 would be Fourier transformed into F1 and F2, frequency 1 and frequency 2, and that is the reason why it's called 2D, because you would have two frequency axes. Now, I will try explaining it in a multiple way. Let's start with T1 with 1 second. You see a peak. This is the T1, another experiment, the other transient with 2 seconds or 2 microseconds or whatever. You see this peak increase, and then T2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 and 16. There are 16 transients, and every transient is different from the other by duration of T1. Tell me, this observation after the FID giving me a spectrum like this makes sense or not? It makes sense. Because during the T1, your magnetization is changing. Your spin on XY plane never static. It moves and it modulates. It is affected by each other. And when it modulates, it is affected. Then you see them when your detector is turned on after a particular transient complete, then you catch the whole thing in a different manner. It is exactly analogous to so-called chemical dynamics experiment in which you see things happening. Difference between kinetics and thermodynamic, Thermodynamic, you have an end product. Kinetics, you see things happening with reference to the time. And if I give you a more easier example, it is just like a football team, you see a person with a football or hockey. Hockey is our national game, so we'll go for hockey. No football, because we are so bad in football. We are 167 out of 168 countries. And the only country didn't really participate in. So don't worry about that. But we are so good in hockey, we are so good in squash, we are very good in cricket, and many other things, yeah. Okay, so when you take photographs with different time intervals, then you see the movement of people in the ground, the full picture. You see a whole dynamics, what is actually happening with the time. And that is precisely the efforts to understand what actually happened at the XY plane. XY plane is your playground where you have spin. And when you bring the spin, they're all coherent. They all are together. And when you give them time, they split and they move away from each other. They exchange information. They are modulated with each other. And this process of splitting this process of modulation, this process of evolution, this process of moving away from each other is time dependent. You know, you give them more time, they would move forward away from each other. You give them less time, you would not really see them. So it is an extremely important component of the 2D NMR experiment, and I'm going to tell you what actually this means. And here you are seeing actually the detector was turned on, the single peak, single vector was a little away, then it came close to the vector, to the detector. This was the time when the detector saw this passing exactly in front of it. And then it starts reducing again as you move forward, as you recorded the transient with different delays. You see it is moving away from the detector and eventually go to the negative side of the detector. And when it goes to the negative side of the detector, it will eventually go to the negative side to the maximum at 11, and then it reduces further, and then it starts coming back to the positive side. It is a full circle, right? Always remember that this evolution or modulation in XY plane is time dependent, and what you are trying to do is to record transient by using a different T1 evolution time. Okay, I want to also tell you that this signal would never achieve like this, and this signal would never achieve like this because of the inherent relaxation, because it is at the same time moving up, right? So there is a sinusoidal decay of a signal also, but in the process you were able to see, you will be able to catch the vectors at different position. You will be able to catch these magnetization vector at different position depending on the time. You see, the concept of 2D NMR spectroscopy is extremely simple, very, very simple. And I take you to another position. These are, now, this looks a very complicated spectrum diagram, but you see what it is. It is primarily here, okay? Then this is a 90x pulse, which bring everything on XY plane, and between this 90x pulse to the detection is T1, right? T1. And then you have 180x pulse, which is what? Spinico. So you forget it. आप भूल जाएं इसको, आप इतना इसके मुतालिक serious ना हो, इसको थोड़ी देर के लिए भूल जाएं, right? It is for removing the inhomogeneity of magnetic field. Anyway, so T1 this time this is one transient, one experiment. This is the other experiment in which you have a time, evolution time increased, right? Incremented. This is the third transient in which you have a further incremented time, evolution time. And this is the fourth transient in which you have a slightly increased evolution time also. So each experiment is different from the other. Before you do this experiment, you must make sure that everything is on the thermal equilibrium. One experiment is completed. You give a preparation time, again make sure that it is thermally at a thermal equilibrium position. Then you carry out this experiment. Third experiment, fourth experiment, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10, as many as you wish. But every time, every experiment is different from the other by incremented evolution time. Now, I want to ask you that a very fundamental basic question. Every time I give a 1 microsecond or millisecond time, okay? Run this experiment I want to continue this experiment for 2-3 hours. Is it possible? This primarily means that every time a transient with 1 millisecond and the last transient with 3 hours. Is it possible? Not possible. Why not possible? Because everything has already gone back to the thermal equilibrium. So whatever you can do, you can only do within the short span of relaxation. Always remember. So you're bound to use your evolution time, which should not be greater than the relaxation time. समझ में आ रहा है? So if this relaxation time, so your evolution time is primarily bound to less than the relaxation time, because when it relaxes, you don't see anything at all. Now I want to think you to think in terms of a vector diagram. In the first experiment, I don't know why it is like. In the first experiment, you have this, and then the second experiment, you have moved forward away from each other, going into the negative direction, and again coming to the positive direction as you increase the transient time. And every time you see the increase in the positive side, then it doesn't exist for detector, then it start appearing on the negative phase of the XY plane, and that's how you see. Now, I want to ask you a question. These FIDs are similar or different? Why different? Okay, this is the height of understanding, and I want you to stay at that height. Don't fall down, right? Okay, now if I want you to do a Fourier transformation of this experiment, this FID, it has a mind of its own, I don't know. God, I don't know why it's... Okay, anyway, God. Okay, if I ask you a question that... God. Hina, can you please ask someone to... Okay, thank you, please come. Okay, if I ask you to Fourier transform this particular FID and this FID and this FID and this FID, tell me whether frequency domain spectrum would be exactly identical or different. Why different? You have to be sure about what you're saying, honestly, because this is the basic concept. Fourier transformation of ST1, T2 and Fourier transformation of ST12 and T2 and T3, T1 and T4 would be same or different? Different. FID would different. And FID, why FID are different? Because your detector is watching these magnetization at different positions. Wonderful. And if ये पता नहीं क्या हो रहा है, खुद ब खुद हो रहा है, believe me. I always have मेरा ख्याल है कि इस कमरे में कुछ है. मेरे अलावा भी बहुत सारे लोग हैं. और कुछ तो ऐसे हैं कि उनके होने से anyway अच्छा कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता, ठीक है? Now I want you to think over it that every time when you record when you convert FID into frequency domain, you get a spectrum which is slightly different from the other, right? So let's assume that each one of them, each line you're seeing, this particular line, is an NMR spectrum, real, genuine NMR spectrum. Farhan, can you kindly sit here because it is actually behaving strangely. So this is a real, genuine frequency spectrum. Then you have another spectrum in which you see a greater peak, and then the third transient, and the fourth transient, and fifth transient, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, and you see these are different NMR spectrum. So they are genuine frequency domain NMR spectrum of a single line. For clarity, for simplicity, these are the genuine proton NMR spectrum resulting from each experiment, which is different from the other because of evolution time. Now, if you see this, and if you place them one after the other, if you place them manually one after the other, or you record them on a plastic sheet and put them underneath each other, or place them like this, and then you come on the site, it's called transposition. This overlapping nahi hai. Overlapping means overlap. In this case is a transposition that you are placing and then you are viewing them from the site, in order to see what is the change in the frequency of that. Now I ask you a question. This from a small positive peak, and then a small negative peak to big negative peak, and then this so-called technical word may sinusoidal function is because of what? What is the reason why they are behaving so differently from each other? Why the frequency domain spectrum of different transients are different? T1, right? So this is a frequency, a genuine real one signal NMR. A genuine real one signal NMR resulted from the conversion of one FID into frequency domain. And you have so many of these experiments, and each experiment is different from the other because of evolution time. So since they are different from each other because of evolution time, the change in the amplitude and the phase of these signals, the change in the amplitude and the phases of the signal in transposition, because you put them in transposition, is sinusoidal in function. So if you make a line on top of everything, this, then you get something like this. There was one more P. Like this, okay? You agree with me? There's something wrong in it. Yeah. You agree with me that the resulting interferogram, this is the frequency and this is the T1. Why they are different from each other? Because of T1. So if you allow me to put T1 as another axis, there should not be a problem, because these peaks are different in amplitude and in phases because of T1. So the other axis is T1, right? Is it clear to everyone? Right? This is frequency, the T2 which was converted into frequency, and then these genuine frequency signals were put together in a transposition system, and the difference in the amplitude and the phases of all these single peaks in so many spectra is because of T1, evolution time. That is the only reason they are different from each other, right? So you have a two-dimensional graph in which you have a frequency and on the other T1, time, right? And if I tell you that it looked like a false FID or so-called pseudo FID, you should not be worried about it, because if you make a line on top of it, it is like FID, right? It is like this, going up, down, going up, down, okay? This is called interferogram, because it's not FID. It is a pseudo FID. It is not generated by the equipment. It is not recorded by the detector also. Remember, detector only record FID once, and that FID has already been converted into frequency. When you place these frequencies one after the other, you get a pseudo FID, and this FID pseudo FID is called interferogram. And so this is the interferogram, which is different from the pseudo FID, from the FID, because this is different from each other by T1. I want you to again understand that is a fundamentally important concept. These are genuine NMR spectrum, one line NMR spectrum. Thank you, Rustam. Shukriya. Understood? I'm taking a little bit more time. These are genuine proton NMR spectrum placed one after the other in a transposition system. Transposition means they are not overlapped, just tilted. Tilted in order to show you that the modulation is because of T1, evolution time. Evolution time made these frequency domain spectrum different from each other, right? And this frequency and this time, now if you draw a line on top of all of them, a single line on top of all of them, you get an FID type thing, right? And that FID type thing is called pseudo FID or interferogram, and this is in the domain of T1. And remember, it also has a tail and it has a head also. Why tail? Because of a simple thing. Because of the simple thing that this cannot go forever. It is achieving a thermal equilibrium. So you cannot have T1 which is infinite. You can have T1 only in a limited time, which should be less than the relaxation time. If you would have more than relaxation time, you would record nothing but noise, because there would be no magnetization on XY plane. This is the reason why you're getting this modulation smaller and smaller and smaller. So T1 time, making them different from each other, and by putting them together, making a pseudo FID interferogram, you generate something like this called T1. Now, this is not recorded by detector. Please understand, it's not recorded by detector. It is just putting them together. It is the work of computer, which after first Fourier transformation put all frequency domain spectrum together and generate a pseudo FID. And when it generates a pseudo FID, you can do everything on it as you used to do on real FID. So for all purposes, this pseudo FID can be digitized by using ADC and Fourier transformed into frequency domain. Good. And now you would have two frequency domain. So in two-dimensional NMR spectrum, in spectroscopy, you have two possibility of data processing. Either you do it at a real FID level or you do it at a pseudo FID level. I would not recommend you to do anything with the FID level because of a simple reason that these FIDs are individually different from each other. You're not collecting so many FIDs together, they are each one of it. So imagine if you're doing apodization on 30,000 FIDs. You don't want to do that, right? You don't want to waste time on it. You convert them into frequency domain. Whatever you want to do, you would do it on single one pseudo FID, which is resulting from so many transients. And these transients were different because of evolution time. And this pseudo FID is a beautiful, nice looking FID. Convert them into digital FID, digital number by using ADC, do all type of data manipulation, carry out apodization, multiply with a Gaussian function, divide with a Lorentzian function. You can do so many things with it, all mathematical calculation in order to improve the sensitivity of 2D spectrum, but you do it on a pseudo FID in two-dimensional NMR spectroscopy. In one-dimensional NMR spectroscopy, you have only one FID, collected FID. So you don't have a possibility of doing anything else also. Now you're carrying out a second Fourier transformation. And when you carry out a second frequency Fourier transformation, you get a two frequency domain, a very bad looking NMR spectrum, but this is the time. You convert first time into frequency. This is different from each other because of evolution. You carry out one more Fourier transformation, you get two frequencies, and this is your 2D NMR spectrum, isn't it? Oh, so easy, huh? Happy? At least once आप कह दिया करेंगे आप खुश हैं. Thank you. And that's how the frequency peaks look like in two dimension, because these peaks are contours. These are contours. You don't want to record your NMR spectrum like this, honestly, because you don't want to see all these peaks. So you actually record them as contours. Contours. These contours are the peaks. These are the signals. These are the peaks in two frequency. One frequency here and the other frequency here. So this is the two-dimensional NMR spectrum. Remember, dimensionality in NMR has actually gone through an evolutionary process. There was a time when people used to think that in order to have a 2D experiment, dimensionality in NMR was always a frequency. So 1D NMR spectrum is one frequency. 2D NMR spectrum, two frequencies. 3D NMR spectrum, three frequencies together. So these were the dimensionality. But dimensionality has now changed a lot, People have started putting different dimensionalities. For instance, if I tell you that the LC NMR can also be made two-dimensional NMR. Very easy. On one axis you have this LC chromatogram, right? so-called retention time of different peaks coming after the other. And in front of every retention peak, you have a proton NMR spectrum. So you have a dimensionality. You can have a dimensionality, for example, diffusion coefficient, like in DOSY. Partition coefficient has a dimensionality and a frequency in dimensionality also. You can have a time exchange of different peaks, different protons between hydrogen bonded partners. You can have a time as a dimensionality also. But in a classical multidimensional NMR spectrum, frequencies are still considered to be the dimensionality as a standard dimensionality, right? So 2D means two frequencies, one on one axis and the other on the other axis. This is coming from the first Fourier transformation, FID converted into, which is small t2 converted into f2, and this is coming from t1 converted into f1. Now, any one of you really want me to repeat the whole thing? I can, because I really want you to understand that the concept of NMR spectroscopy is essentially very, very simple. It's not very, very difficult. It is just question of recording various transient with incremented evolution time, converting FIDs which are different from each other by Fourier transformation, putting these together one after the other in a transposition manner and generating a pseudo FID which has an axis of T1. They all are different from each other because of T1. They are all different, because these are one T1 अगर आप ये बताएंगे in a very simple term, this is 1 second, 2 second, 3 second, 4 second, 4 second. You can have a large number of T1, but not infinite T1. Should be always less than the relaxation time. Okay, and when you create a pseudo FID, then you carry out a second frequency spectrum, and then you get a two-dimensional experiment spectrum which look like this. Cross peaks, called cross peaks. Now I want to take you through the whole process. Raw 2D data matrix. Raw 2D data matrix means primarily the FIDs. Apply window function to T2, FID, zero field, Fourier transformation for T2, F2 spectra with T1 interferogram. This was the one which I am showing you since last half an hour. F2 spectra with T1. Then you do window function on interferogram, zero filling of interferogram, Fourier transformation with reference to T1. You get a two-dimensional spectrum. But in two-dimensional spectrum, you need to do other things too. You need to do a phase correction, tilting, symmetrization, so many other things, which I would tell you in a little while actually. There are different types of, there are lots. So while one-dimensional NMR spectrums are very few, 10, 12 maximum, polarization transfer, maybe little variants of polarization transfer, essentially the same. Proton NMR is proton NMR, C13 NMR can be broadband, off resonance, or fully decoupled. Or cathode spin echo Fourier transformation is essentially the same. Polarization transfer is essentially the same. Inadequate is only one experiment. The two-dimensional experiments are literally in hundreds. Lots of two-dimensional experiments, lots of them. And here I want to take you to a very interesting concepts. You see this magnetization on XY plane, which you are sampling with evolution time. Sampling ही कहते हैं ना, knowledge is sampled, information is sampled, information is collected, is an extremely interesting playground. This XY plane, depending on the type of pulse sequence, you can obtain different types of information, or more precisely, the types of information you want to obtain, you design a spatial pulse sequence for that. For instance, you all are aware of the fact that when you have a coherent magnetization vector, after a 90x pulse, they are splitted because of two reasons. One, chemical shift, and the other, coupling. The third is magnetic inhomogeneity, but you always have 180. Remember, spin echo pulse is always there to save you from magnetic inhomogeneity. So they are splitted because of chemical shift and couplings. So if you are interested in determining the coupling partner, you design an experiment in which you let them evolve together, like in COSY spectroscopy. You want to know geminal coupling and vicinal coupling, protons coupled with each other, right? If you want to record a heteronuclear coupling between proton and carbon, you design an experiment in which you see the coupling between proton and carbon. If you want to record an experiment in which you want to see dipolar coupling, long-range coupling between proton and proton, then you design an experiment in a way that you get long-range coupling. Depending on the type of information, you design a spatial pulse sequence, preparation time, spatial pulse sequence, and then you let them play on XY plane. And this is an extremely interesting experiment. You see, this is the XY plane, and I always found it very useful example. This is a room, and it has two doors, one here and the other on the other side, right? And when we enter into this room is our XY plane, right? And we enter into this plane by a 90x pulse or 90y pulse or whatever. And then this is the detector on the other side. And we all enter into this room together at the same time, right? Certainly. And then we go out from here without spending any time in this room. Now, the knowledge content between us is minimal, very, very less, right? Because the evolution time was very less. If we stay, let's say, about 2 minutes in this room on XY plane, then we would know more about each other. At least we would know how many girls, how many men, how many others, and then we go out, right? And if we give more evolution time, then we would know more about each other. You know, we would know that from which nationalities most of us belong, what is the accent of our, how we speak, you know, something like this. So the knowledge content increases with evolution time, the time we spend together. And this is one way of collecting information. We have eyes and ears open and nose open too, you know, because sometimes it makes lots of sense. Anyway, so, but this is one way of information. Assume that this is one way of information, that we are exchanging information, and after a certain evolution time, our knowledge content about each other increases with the time, right? If we have closed eyes, then we would have perhaps a different sets of information, the sounds. You would probably not know how many girls and boys. You would probably know with the sound that who is soft spoken, who is not speaking, whatever. And if you have, let's say, ears closed and only eyes open, then you would know how many people, dresses and all that. So depending the content of information you want to collect, you design an experiment in 2D. And by using this particular pulse sequence, you let them modulate. I'm using a word called modulation, and I really urge you to go and find the meaning of modulation in the dictionary. It is different in different dictionaries. Modulation is primarily the effect from each other. You know, how we affect, how these spins are affected from each other. It depends on the type of modulation we want them to go through, right? So this is the content of information. For instance, if you talk about scalar coupling, there is a technique called correlated spectroscopy or heteronuclear quantum coherence, TOCSY, total correlation spectroscopy, heteroCOSY, multiple quantum experiments, heteronuclear multiple quantum coherence experiment. When you talk about dipolar coupling in space, you can have NOESY, HSQC, NOESY, HMQC, you know, different experiments. There are a variety of different experiments. The real workhorse of NMR spectroscopist is COSY, correlated spectroscopy. And this is essentially the same, shown again. This is one transient in which you have less of time delay between two pulses. This is another transient in which you have more time, more time, more time, more time, and as you give more time, you would have a different FID, and when you convert FIDs into frequency domain spectrum, you put them together, you create a pseudo FID, you do ADCs and appetization on pseudo FID, window function and everything, and then you carry out a next second Fourier transformation and you get a two-dimensional experiment. So this is the incremented time delay, and incremented time delay will give you lots of information. For example, these are different NMR spectrum. This is ethylbenzene. Ethylbenzene has CH3 appearing as a triplet, CH2 appearing as a quartet, and this particular phenyl appearing as a multiplet, symmetrical, because these peaks are symmetrical, right? In carbon 13, this is again a one-dimensional experiment. You have methyl, you have CH2, and then you have lots of aromatic carbons, more or less at the same place also. In two-dimensional NMR spectrum, although it's a very easy case, but you see this is the diagonal peak. It's called diagonal peak. Diagonal peak, and you see three signals, the same three signals, this, and this. This, and this. But you see in this that if you draw a line, straight line, and then a perpendicular line, you would be able to know that this methylene is coupled with this metal. Okay? And this is the COSY correlated spectroscopy. Now, you want me to attempt to tell you what COSY is? Because there is no guarantee that I can honestly that you understand. But I want to try it. I want to try my luck, okay? Okay. You see, in this experiment, these are 290 pulses. Okay? 290 pulses. And it is a homonuclear NMR experiment. You don't worry about this. इन सारी चीज़ों को भूल जाएं. बस एक 290 pulses को याद रखें. and the time between the two 90 pulses is 0. So what is this? 180 pulse? When we have no time between two 90 pulses, this means? And when there is no magnetization on XY plane, what you would have? Nothing. Only noise, right? So you start with the noise. The first, this is a cozy pulse sequence. This is a correlated pulse sequence which everybody try to avoid. You go to NMR books, nobody wants to go into it because it's rather difficult to explain the cozy sequence. But I want to try my luck. I hope I'm a lucky man today, actually. Okay. Now, second transient. Your imagination is required. In absolute attention, khushu, khuzu, required for this particular thing. And even then, nothing is guaranteed except the goodwill of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, between this, there is a time delay of, let's say, 2 seconds. Okay, what would happen after the first 90x pulse? Okay, I'll give you an example of an AX system. A is a proton and X is a proton. A and X are scalarly coupled with each other. A appears as a doublet and X appears as a doublet too. Right? Both would appear as a doublet. For simplicity, you start drawing on your piece of paper only A. Only A. Right? When you give some time between the two pulses, the A will split into 2. Yes? Yes? And if some of you are drawing X, this is also split into? Okay, let's do the same thing. Half of you will play with the X and half of you will play with the A. Okay? And it makes no difference to me, because both are homonuclear, they have a different frequency, but now they split into 2 parts. Right? The splitting of A, because of this time delay, is dependent on the time. Yes? Yes. So every time the detector would be turned on, this doublet would be at a different place. Yes? Different place. So, for example, if there is a point in which they both counter-rotating parts of the doublet have reached to negative X and X, you brought them on Y, remember? You brought them a Y and they split into 2. Why they split into 2? Huh? Coupling with what? With X, right? X is a coupling partner and X can be alpha and? Okay, so it split into 2 parts and it moved away from each other, counter-rotating. One is slow moving and the other is faster moving. The position of this would be different. When you have absolutely no gap between T1, then the 90x pulse will bring it to the minus Z and you will have no signal, right? When you give it a little bit more time and then you give a 90x pulse, what will happen? A component of it will go down. Please try to understand that as you move from T0 to T maximum, until they become antiphase, only a component of it will go down, and this component is decreasing every time. Decreasing every time. A component of that is decreasing every time until it reaches to a stage when it is antiphase. When they are counter-rotating, when it is one on minus x and the other is minus x and the other is x. बना दिए? क्या हुआ? I'm talking about animal spectroscopy. Homonuclear. I'm talking about homonuclear. Right? That is a question which need to be answered. You see, one is faster moving and the other is slower moving because the X coupling partner is beta and alpha, and therefore it has a different be effective, right? क्या हुआ? I want to ask you a question. Now, they are moving away from each other, right? At a particular T1, the component of a doublet go into antiphase, as you have seen in case of inept. Remember, in case of inept, you have seen that the component of doublet go antiphase, absolutely antiphase, right? When it goes into absolutely antiphase, when you give a 90x pulse, one go to Z and the other go Y. Good? Yes or no? Repeat. Cozy experiment. Cozy is for proton and MR is essentially the same. 180 को minus कर दें इसमें से 90, right? So there are this, then you bring it to the XY plane, then it is split into two parts, then it goes to this particular shape, antiphase, right? With time. It is happening with time. You remember, every time you increase the T1, then you reach to a stage when they are antiphase. When the antiphase, when you apply a 90 vipers, then it go up and down, right? And when they go up and down, this polarization is transferred to what? Carbon की तरह यहाँ पे. You are not doing anything with the carbon. Coupling partner क्या है? प्रोटॉन ही है, मगर कौन सा वाला प्रोटॉन है? आप लोगों से मैं इसी तरह लर्न शो करूंगा जैसे कि आमतौर पे सांसें कैसे लगती है? anyway. Okay, listen. What happened? This is the case, right? After a particular T1 time, increasing. Remember, every time this is moving apart from each other until it reaches to absolutely antiphase, right? Antiphase. And when it reaches to the antiphase, you provide a 90 vipers, one go up, the other go down, right? And where this polarization is going? To the X, right? And some of you who are drawing X would probably tell me that this is going to the A. Oh, good. Excellent. कोई excitement नहीं है. सारे relaxation stage पे लगते हैं. In fact, some of them are thermal equilibrium or thermally dead actually. Excited, huh? Okay, you agree with me that this can reach in both for A and X, right? It means that the A can transfer the polarization to the X and X can transfer the polarization to A. Here in this case, there was no polarization transfer, right? In this case, there was a polarization transfer, okay? So when I show you the spectrum, yes, this is a very, very valid question, and I don't know. Sorry, no, I'll tell you why. You see, in this particular 2D NMR spectrum, these are diagonal peaks in which there is no modulation. These are the result of the early T1s in which there was no polarization transfer. Remember, in the early T1, when you have T1 is equal to 0 to T1 with less of it, when there is no antiphase, before close to the antiphase, these are non-modulated, they are not affected by each other. They are affected only by coupling, but there was no polarization took place between them. As in inept, inept polarization only takes place when you bring it to the Z and Z negative. So when they become antiphase, and they become antiphase with the incremented time delay. So in the early experiment in which you have time delay less, these are the non-modulated peaks in which there is no effect of each other in terms of polarization transfer. But when they affect each other and mix with the polarization of the first one, so for instance this proton mixed with the polarization of X, this is your A and this is your X. Actually मैं उल्टा कहना चाहिए, this is A and this is X. This A mixed with the X and this peak arise, which is the average of both of them, right? Because there was a polarization transfer took place between two of them, right? On the other hand, when X transfer the polarization to A, another peak appear at this position. There are two different polarization transfer. A polarization transfer to X and X polarization transfer to. In the cases when you had absolutely antiphase close T1 and then you carry out a polarization transfer, you see the polarization transfer of A to X, and whoever is working with the X would say from X to simultaneous process. So this peak, which is away from the diagonal, this is the diagonal, and diagonal is a pure NMR spectrum, just you see from the upside down. This is a proton NMR spectrum as you have, just you're looking it from the upside down. These are the peaks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are the peak signals which you see like this, right? When you see from the above, you see in the contour. But these diagonal peaks are unmodulated. They are non-modulated. No, F1 and F2 are the constant thing. F1 and F2 is the process. Absolutely. As you go further, information state, you can say that there is going to be a T1 in which you would have an antiphase doublet. or close to an antiphase doublet. So as you go closer to X and minus X, you start transferring the polarization to the coupling partner, both in case of A and both in case of X. When you are away from the antiphase and when you're closer to only Y, at a time when magnetization was transferred to XY plane, Y plane, then you would have non-modulated signal. But as they move apart from each other and reach to a stage where 90 Y pulse will bring them to Z and negative Z, you create a situation in which polarization is transferred to the coupling partner. And when the polarization transfer takes place from A to X and from X to A, then you see a modulated signals, and these are off diagonal, and this is called off diagonal. F off is O double F, away from the diagonal. So these off diagonal peaks are modulated signals. This represent polarization transfer from A to X, and this represent polarization transfer from X to A. That is the reason why you always have a symmetrization of, and this is called symmetrization. Any peak which is appearing here and not here is ghost peak. You know, any peak which appears on one side of the spectrum is a ghost peak and always minus and cancelled out. You want to understand this again? And I will try my luck again. You see, I'm so excited today. Correlated spectroscopy is essentially the same as polarization transfer, with the following difference, that in ENaPT you are recording the carbon-13. In this case you are recording only the proton, right? There is no pulse sequences for carbon-13. All pulse sequences are homonuclear proton pulse sequences, and it depends on incremented time delay. You have 90 pulse, 90 X pulse and a 90 Y pulse. 90 plus 90 pulse will turn to 180, which means nothing, noise. So you start with the noise action, okay? Then you have another transient. Then you have another transient in which you give a time in between. And when you give a time, they split into two. A is split into two and X is split into two. Treat them differently. A is split into two and X split into two. And then you give a 90 pulse also, 90 Y pulse. A part of it would probably go into negative Z, not everything would go to negative Z. Only as you increase the time delay, you would reach to a stage, for instance this stage, in which you have this doublet absolutely antiphase to each other. And when the doublet is antiphase to each other, the 90 Y pulse will rotate them Z and minus Z. And remember, this is your population inversion. But this population always go to the coupling partner. So this population of A is mixing with the population of X. Remember, X doesn't really need any population. It is also a proton. But you have done something. You just want to mix them together. When you mix them together, their chemical shift also mix. And it comes as an average of both of them. Right? When you do exactly the same thing with the X, it transfers the polarization to A. And when you transfer the polarization to A, you would have a situation in which the A and X chemical shifts are also mixed together, and as a result you get a spectrum like this. Now in this spectrum, these peaks, diagonal peaks, are representing representing the non-modulated signal when there was nothing antiphase, when there was no mixing of polarization. They were just absolutely different from each other. They were modulating in a different way. But close to the antiphase, you would have a polarization transfer taking place. And when the polarization transfer takes place, you start observing an off-diagonal peak. And these off-diagonal peaks are the average of two peaks because you have a polarization transfer and population mixing. It's called population mixing between A and X. This is A mixing with the X, and this is X mixing with the A. As a result, you get these two peaks. Now, it is so easy. You draw a straight line, and then you draw a perpendicular line. You would know precisely that this proton is coupled to this proton. And this proton is coupled to this proton is coupled to this proton, and this proton coupled to this proton. Very easy case. Valine. The most downfield proton on diagonal peak is NH, right? NH. And this NH is coupled with CH. So this is CH. And this CH, this is CH, is coupled with another CH. So this is CH. And this CH is coupled with two methyls, right? And when there are two methyls, then you get two diagonal peaks. Because there is a mixing of population of this with this and with this. This also, as a result, you see two peaks here and here. Now, you agree with me that they would have two different chemical shifts, right? Because they are diazerotopic or enantiotopic protons, methyls, because you have, diazerotopic protons, because you have a chiral center and these two methyls would come at a different position. Agree? So as a result, you get this thing. Remember, all 2D NMR spectrum, except a few, are interpreted in the similar peak. This is the diagonal peak, which represents signals which are non-modulated, which have no effect of each other, and then off-diagonal peak, which are resulting from the modulation, polarization transfer, population mixing, you just name it. And these peaks thus are extremely important because they help you to link them together. Remember, if A and X are not coupled, there would be no polarization transfer. And you would not see any peak in between. Right? Because there would be no population transfer. They can transfer the population only when they share the energy levels together. As you have seen in case of ENEPT, you have seen that there were 4 energy levels exactly in the same account. There would be 4 energy levels for AX. 2 alpha, 2 beta, beta alpha, right? So this population transfer is a cross-cutting phenomena which is used in lots of experiments. In this case is a homonuclear polarization transfer. Essentially the same. If you minus 180 spin echo का अगर आप भूल जाएं तो inept pulse for proton is exactly the same as you have. The only difference is that in this case you are going from non-modulation to full modulation, from non-mixing to, from total noise to real signals, right? And in between what is actually happening is an evolution, through the evolution time. If you don't record that, you would never be able to mix them together. Right? Okay? Question? It is a kind of? Modulation, mixing of polarization takes place at an optimum time when they are antiphase to each other. If you increase the time, then modulation will start going into the negative direction because you cannot mix. 90 Vipers will not give you a Z component. So always remember that you always, by using T1, you go for an evolution. Now you will ask me a question that this polarization transfer can be done in a thermodynamic manner. You just calculate how much time it takes to go for antiphase, right? And then you record it. Fine, you record it. But in that case, you would not have non-modulated signals. You would have only modulated signals. And when you would have modulated signals, you would not have any reference here to connect. So in case of having a modulated, non-modulated to modulated signal, you have to record a snapshot of the whole thing, right? And this whole thing is a 2D NMR spectrum. Correlated spectroscopy looks so very easy, but it is really difficult to understand. I invite you to go to many texts. Most of the authors are right to explain COSY, because COSY is one of the most difficult phenomena to explain in terms of vector diagram. This is the reason why I didn't really give you a vector diagram, because how can I make vector diagram of the whole thing when I don't really know where they are? Honestly, I don't know where they are actually. This is only the time delay, and eventually there is a time when you see a polarization transfer. But in between, what is actually happening, God knows, right? So COSY, you go to 30 different NMR books which we have in library, you would hardly find any definition of correlated spectroscopy, except one or two actually. Okay, so now we understand that this is two frequencies which make the interpretation easy. Interpretation of this small molecule is easy, but you can have a cholesterol and you can have a large molecule and you can spread the coupled proton on the off-diagonal site. This is the overlapping signals. But when you modulate them, they go away from the diagonal site and the interpretation becomes easier for you to achieve. This is the reason why two-dimensional NMR spectroscopy is so extremely important. And in two-dimensional NMR spectroscopy, COSY is the workhorse. The one technique which is used the most is COSY, right? The one I showed you is a COSY 90, but there are lots of other things also. I don't want to mix it when there are lots of correlated spectroscopy. There are DQF, double quantum filter, they call phase contrast COSY, there are COSY 45, there are COSY 135, there are lots of it, But essentially the concept is the same, that you go from an absolute zero noise to unmodulated signal, and then you reach to a stage when they modulate, when they reach to a stage when there is a population transfer and mixing takes place. When there is a population transfer and mixing takes place, they average out the chemical shift and you start seeing the off-diagonal peak. So this is the off-diagonal peak. And remember, if I take you to the basics of the 2D NMR spectroscopy, this is your FID. Every FID is Fourier transformed into a real NMR signal. All real NMR signals, all frequency spectrum. And you put all frequencies together, frequency spectrums together, one after the other, in a transposition manner. Terminology in NMR is very, very overlapping means different. Transposition means that you put them slightly one after the other, but slightly moving to the leftward or outward. So when you put them together like this, you see a modulation in frequency because of T1. And this T1 is your second dimension. And this pseudo FID this pseudo FID is called interferogram, and this pseudo FID is then Fourier transform exactly in the same manner as you have seen in case of FIDs. So you see, what I've done is just placed a line on top of my frequency domain signal, and this is my pseudo FID, and this pseudo FID is depending on T1, and this is then Fourier transformed, and when you Fourier transform them, then you get a 2D spectrum and different types of peaks. The peaks which is from this corner to this corner is called diagonal peaks, unmodulated signals, and these are the modulated signals. Modulated signal as a result of polarization transfer, population mixing, and modulation. Always remember. Okay, this is the reason they appear off diagonal, and this then help you to connect them together. They gives you information about the coupling. They give you information about the geminal coupling and vicinal coupling. This is the peak which is the result of a transfer of A to X, and this is the peak which is the result of transfer of X to A. So therefore you have a symmetrization. Therefore you see peaks on the both side of diagonal, and is a very important thing. Remember, if you have any peak which is present only on one half and not on the other half, is a ghost peak, is a noise peak. And in symmetrization, very simple routine is carried out. You cut everything which is not on the other side. Symmetrization. You make a symmetrical spectrum, because if A is transferred to X, the X should transfer to A also, because they are homonuclear system. Homonuclear system. Also remember that inept and cozy is essentially the same. The difference is that in inept you record carbon 13 and you see a intensity enhancement. Right? Intensity enhancement. In this case, coupling partner doesn't require population. They don't require polarization transfer because they're already active, they are homonuclear, but of course mixing of them together would essentially lead to an off-diagonal peak or averaging chemical shift also. Okay? I don't know how successful I am, but anything which you want to discuss at this stage, because I am now moving forward. Anywhere from in Pakistan, any place, you want to ask any question? You see, since last 2-3 days, nobody is asking question, and this make me worried, really worried. Sargoda, Dr. Yasmin, Humaira Yasmin. Dr. Irfan, Omar, I learned some name actually. Okay, anyway. But let's see, there is a very interesting spectrum also, heteronuclear J-resolved spectrum. In this case you have a frequency, carbon 13, and here you have coupling constant in frequency also. This is a two-dimensional experiment. And you see the most downfield proton is this one. So this is wrong. मैंने इसको correct कर दीजिए, because since last 200 years I'm just always saying that. Okay, this is one. It should be one also. Okay, this is the most downfield carbon, and this carbon appears as a carbon should appear as a this CH should appear as a doublet, right? And this is 2. This is a CH also, right? This should appear as a, and this methyl quartet, and this methyl, and this methyl, okay, and this CH2 triplet. You see lots of doublets, triplets, quartets, and all of it. Now it's so easy. Remember this lousy looking, very bad, fully coupled C13 NMR spectrum. What you have done, you spread the coupling on one frequency and you have chemical shift on the other frequency. This is the chemical shift of carbons, and this is the coupling of carbon, heteronuclear coupling. They are coupling with the proton. It's so easy because you see the same doublet. हो क्या रहा था? What was actually happening, that you were looking all of these carbons, fully coupled carbon from one axis. When you look them all together, they were all intermixed. What you have done, you added one more dimension into it. And when you add one more dimension, you see that this C9 is a quartet. CH3 is a quartet. And this C8 is a quartet also. And this C10 is a quartet. 1, 2, 3, 4. So, and this C3, which is a CH2, is triplet. And C7, which is a CH, is a doublet. And the C5 is a CH doublet. CH4, CH24, this is triplet. C6 is a triplet also. This is a single a doublet, and this is doublet. So you see two doublets, you see several, you see three doublets or four doublets, I don't know, and so many CH2s, so many CH3s, and you can even calculate the coupling constant. How can you calculate coupling constant? Very easy. Just make a straight line from here to here and a straight line from here to here. Difference between them is a coupling constant. Okay? So very exciting. Now I want to repeat one thing. Like in correlated spectroscopy, when I attempt to tell you what actually happened through the reference or modulation by coupling, you can modulate them, you can make them affected from each other by scalar coupling, dipolar coupling, long range coupling, heteronuclear coupling, homonuclear coupling. You can just modulate them. You need to have a special pulse sequence. Like in COSY, you had two 90 pulses, one 90X and the other was 90Y. And this gives you information about proton-proton, because you had it in proton domain and you were able to see the modulated signals and non-modulated signals also. You can design an experiment in which you can see a different types of information. Different types of information coming out of an spectrum. Okay? So this is the basis of 2D NMR spectroscopy. And I'm very happy man because I can see some bright faces. A few, only few. Yes. Any question? J-result, sure, of course. I am very happy to do that. You see, this is the chemical shift. Okay, and remember this, this fully decoupled C13 NMR spectrum is just put on top of it for ease of interpretation. कोई और purpose नहीं है इसका. You don't need to have that. And it was recorded separately. It is not possible to understand. This was recorded fully decoupled C13 NMR spectrum of penthol was recorded and put right on top of this 2D spectrum. Okay, so you have many carbon, 1, 2, 3, as many carbon, and if you're looking them in isolation, you would understand there are so many carbons and with so many chemical shifts. You don't have any information about the multiplicities of it also. Okay, you have no information about the multiplicities. But if you record a 2D NMR spectrum in which you have a special pulse sequence which modulate the coupling between carbon and proton, then you would be able to see that each carbon would be appearing as a multiplet depending on the number of proton attached. methyl will appear as a quartet, CH2 will appear as triplets, and CHs will appear as doublet. Okay, so this is this carbon. Okay, CH. This is a CH, and you see this is the most downfield carbon appearing as a doublet, and you can see the doublet very clearly. Okay, this is C2, which is appearing as a doublet also. This is C6, this CH2, and you know why chemical shifts are different. I don't need to tell you because this is in the neighborhood of hydroxy containing, and this is CH2 of C4. This is a CH of C5. This is C7. This is C3. This is C10. This is C9, 8, and this is C9. So you see a quartet. You are not watching them as a quartet like this. You are watching them as this peak from the upside down. Right? When you see these fingers from upside down, you will be able to see like this. So doublet will appear as a 2 contour, and a triplet will appear as a 3 contour, and a quartet will appear as a 4 contour. Okay? Fine? And then you can calculate the J very easily. The center of this peak, a part of the doublet, and the center of this peak, you make a straight line, you minus this with this, you get the coupling constant. Very easy interpretation, you get all the information. Chemical shift, multiplicity, at the same time you also calculate CH, coupling. CH coupling constant is calculated by using a J-resolve. J-resolve, J is a coupling, resolve means you were able to see, you were able to resolve the coupling. Coupling resolve spectrum. Heteronuclear, because these are proton carbon. Okay, now I ask you a question. Why it looks so different from a cozy? In the cozy you had a diagonal peak. In this case you don't have a diagonal peak. Can you have a diagonal peak in this case? You cannot have a diagonal peak in this case because scale is different. Carbon has a very different scale and proton has a very different scale, you know. So you cannot have you cannot have a non-modulated proton and carbon as a diagonal peak because they are different. Therefore you need to have a different. So appearance of the spectrum can look different because of the compulsion of the nature, but correlation is essentially the same. You correlate one axis with the other axis. Okay? Anything else? Okay. Tomorrow, National Day, 24th, I won't be around. I'll be in Islamabad. 25th is Jummah, and then we're meeting on 26th, inshallah, at 1:45. Okay? Saturday. Is alright for everyone? कोई class तो नहीं होती आप लोगों की? Is alright for other people in other universities?
Is it, sir?
Yes, Sumaira.
Sir, Saturday को हमारे लिए problem है.
Saturday को आप लोगों के लिए मुश्किल है?
जी सर, क्योंकि यूनिवर्सिटी में ऑफ डे होता है और हमें बहुत से लोगों को बाउंड करना पड़ेगा वीडियो कॉन्फ्रेंसिंग को जो अरेंज करते हैं.
अच्छा, तो let's wait for the VPP people will let you know when would be the next. So Saturday is probably not on actually. You would all receive information, inshallah, that because it's not suitable for, perhaps for other universities also, because some universities have two holidays. Okay, let us work it out. Maybe next week we will have instead of 3-4 discussion sessions.
Okay, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.